Imagine this for a second. It's the middle of the night. 5 men arrive at a hospital carrying a young woman who appears unconscious. They tell doctors she's just collapsed. But something isn't right. The bruises on her face tell a different story. The stiffness in her body tells another. Doctors examine her and quietly make a horrifying realization. She hadn't just died. She had been dead for hours. So why was someone pretending she was still alive? And perhaps an even bigger question, how does a woman lose her life in such a brutal way? And months later, the man accused of killing her walks away with just 5 years in prison. This is the story of Angela Muthoni.
Twisted tales in every folder. Truth runs hot while the trail gets colder. Crime dopers, we don't look away.
We need to have a forum. Watu wakae chini, wajue what is going on. Tukue na hiyo, tukue serikali at least iangalie kitu. Si hata vijana bado wanauawa, hata watoto wanauawa at young age. Wacha watu wakae chini waongee what is going on. Hata kama kuna challenges. Na ningetaka kuomba hata wasichana hawa wadogo. Ukiona mtu amekugonga mara ya kwanza, don't wait for the second time.
Welcome back to Crime Dopers, where crime meets truth. I'm Ol Joro, and if you're joining me today, thank you for being here. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that today's episode discusses domestic violence and femicide. If these topics are difficult for you, please take care of yourself as you listen. Angela Muthoni's story isn't just another crime story. It's about trust. It's about violence hidden behind closed doors. And it's about a justice system that left many Kenyans asking, was justice really served? By the end of today's episode, you'll understand why this case sparked outrage across the country and why so many people believe Angela's story became much bigger than one tragic death. Before headlines, before protests, before courtrooms, Angela Muthoni was simply a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was only 24 years old. She came from Ol Joro Orok in Nakuru County. Although her family's roots trace back to Endarasha in Nyeri County, at 24, life is supposed to be opening up. You're making plans, thinking about your future, building relationships, maybe starting a career, maybe dreaming about marriage, maybe wondering where life will take you next. Angela should have had all those opportunities. Instead, her name would soon become one of the many names associated with Kenya's growing femicide crisis. There isn't much publicly available about Angela's daily life, and sometimes that's one of the saddest things about true crime. We end up knowing victims because of how they died instead of how they lived. Think about that. When someone is murdered, their personality often disappears behind police reports and court files. Their dreams, their hobbies, their laugh, those become footnotes. Instead, people remember crime scene photos, autopsy reports, court hearings. Angela deserved far more than that. Now, here's where the story begins to take a dark turn. Angela was reportedly in a relationship with a man named Nungo. Like many abusive relationships, very little about what happened behind closed doors was visible to outsiders. And that's important because when stories like this emerge, people often ask, why didn't she just leave? But anyone who has studied domestic violence knows leaving is often the most dangerous time. Many victims stay because they hope things will improve. Others fear retaliation. Some are financially dependent. Others have been emotionally manipulated for months or even years. We simply don't know the private dynamics of Angela's relationship. What we do know is how it ended. Reports indicate that sometime during the night of July 16, 2025, a violent domestic altercation broke out inside a rented room at 64 Estate in Gatimu Ward, Ol Joro Orok constituency. Now imagine that scene. A small rented room, no cameras, no witnesses, just 2 people. Somewhere during that argument, violence escalated and escalated and escalated until Angela was fighting for her life. This wasn't a simple push, this wasn't a slap. According to the post-mortem that will later be conducted, Angela sustained severe injuries to her face, blunt force trauma to her head, and eventually manual strangulation. Think about that for a moment. Manual strangulation. That means someone's hands, not an accident, not a fall, not self-defense in the ordinary sense. The medical findings later concluded that Angela died from strangulation combined with blunt force injuries to the head alongside visible facial trauma. And here's something that investigators and many members of the public couldn't ignore. Strangulation takes time, and like what movies often portray, a person doesn't lose consciousness instantly. Medical research has consistently shown that manual strangulation requires sustained force. Even after someone loses consciousness, pressure often has to continue before death occurs. So ask yourself this: how many opportunities were there to stop? How many moments existed where someone could have chosen differently? Those are uncomfortable questions, but they're questions this case forces us to confront. Eventually, the room became quiet. Angela wasn't moving. The argument was over, but the story was only beginning. Because instead of immediately calling an ambulance, instead of notifying police, instead of asking neighbors for help, something else happened. Something that will later become one of the most disturbing aspects of this entire case. According to investigators, Angela's boyfriend allegedly remained inside the room with her lifeless body for hours. Hours. Just let that sink in. What happened during those hours? Was there panic? Was there regret? Was there an attempt to think of a way out? No one knows for certain, but those missing hours became one of the most haunting unanswered parts of Angela's story, because eventually someone made a decision not to report the death, not to surrender, but to move the body. And that is where this story becomes even more unbelievable. In the next chapter, a tuk-tuk, 4 friends, and one desperate attempt to explain away the unexplainable would pull an entire community into one of Kenya's most disturbing femicide investigations. One of the things I've learned from covering true crime is this: people lie, people forget, people change their stories, but forensic evidence, it doesn't care about emotions, it doesn't care about excuses, it simply tells the truth. And in Angela Muthoni's case, that truth was heartbreaking. Within days, investigators ordered a post-mortem examination. This will become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case, because while Angela could no longer speak for herself, her injuries could. The autopsy revealed multiple visible injuries to her face. She had sustained blunt force trauma to the head, but perhaps the most disturbing finding was the cause of death. Angela died from manual strangulation combined with blunt force trauma. Take one moment to process that. Not one fatal injury, but multiple forms of violence. That immediately suggested investigators were looking at an extremely violent assault, not a simple accident or a momentary altercation. Here's something experts on domestic violence often point out. Strangulation is one of the strongest indicators that abuse has escalated to an extremely dangerous level. It's intensely personal, it requires sustained physical force, and in many domestic violence cases, survivors who have previously been strangled are at a significantly higher risk of later being killed. Now, to be clear, we don't know whether Angela had experienced previous abuse. Nothing publicly available confirms that, but we do know how this relationship ended, and the level of violence described in the post-mortem shocked many Kenyans. As investigators reconstructed the sequence of events, the timeline became clearer. A violent altercation. Angela suffers catastrophic injuries. Hours pass. Friends are called. A tuk-tuk is hired. She's taken to a clinic, then to Nakuru County Referral Hospital. doctors determined she had already been dead for several hours before arrival. Each step narrowed investigators' understanding of what happened that night. And here's something that's easy to overlook. Those missing hours mattered because every hour that passed meant another hour before police could secure the scene, another hour before evidence could be preserved, another hour before witnesses' memories began to fade. Every investigator knows that time is one of the most valuable pieces of evidence. Once it's lost, you can never get it back. Police didn't stop with one arrest. They arrested Alex Nungo, along with the 4 men who had helped transport Angela to hospital. That surprised many people. Why arrest everyone? Well, at that early stage of an investigation, police often cast a wide net. Investigators still needed to determine who knew Angela had already died, who believed she was still alive, who helped move the body, who might have interfered with evidence. Those were questions investigators had to answer before deciding individual responsibility. Just a few days later, the suspects appeared before court. The prosecution requested more time, specifically 14 additional days to complete investigations, collect witness statements, and finalize forensic evidence before formal plea proceedings. On the surface, that seemed routine. Major homicide investigations often require additional time. Witnesses must be interviewed, crime scenes processed, medical reports completed, digital evidence analyzed. Nothing unusual there. At least, not yet. As details emerged, Angela's story began spreading rapidly across Kenya. Social media exploded. Photos of the smiling 24-year-old circulated everywhere. People asked the same question again and again. How many more women have to die before something changes? Her case quickly became more than a local homicide investigation. It became another painful reminder of Kenya's ongoing struggle with gender-based violence and femicide. Organizations, activists, and ordinary Kenyans began sharing Angela's story, demanding accountability and calling for stronger protections for women. But while the public focused on the brutality of Angela's death, another mystery was quietly developing. Not inside the investigation, but inside the courtroom. Because something unusual happened over the next few months. The case moved fast, very fast, far faster than many people expected for a homicide case. Now, to be fair, every case is different. Some cases move quickly because evidence is straightforward, others take years. But what happened next will leave Angela's family feeling blindsided, because behind closed doors, critical decisions were being made. And according to the family, they had no idea those decisions were even happening. There's one detail that I think deserves more attention. Justice isn't only about the final sentence, it's also about process. Victims' families often say that simply being heard matters, being informed matters, knowing what's happening matters. When families feel excluded, they don't just lose confidence in one case, they begin losing confidence in the justice system itself. And sadly, that's exactly how Angela's family says they felt. They believed they were waiting for a murder trial. Instead, they were about to walk into a courtroom and hear something they never expected. In the next part, we look into the controversial plea again, the reduction of the charge, the 5-year sentence that sparked outrage across Kenya, and why many people still believe Angela Muthoni did not receive justice.
Being a murder case, the family of the victims were informed that there was a plea bargaining that was entered into without their involvement. A probation report was given. The judge went ahead to give a sentence which we feel is very unlawful and irregular.
For Angela's family, the hardest day wasn't the day of the funeral. It wasn't even the day they identified her body, because those days, as painful as they were, came with one belief: the belief that justice would eventually catch up, that one day they'd sit inside a courtroom, hear all the evidence, listen to witnesses, and finally understand exactly what happened to Angela. Instead, they would walk into court expecting a routine mention and walk out believing justice had slipped through their fingers. Months passed after Angela's death. Many assumed investigators were preparing for what will likely be a lengthy murder trial. After all, murder is one of the most serious criminal charges under Kenyan law. These cases usually involve extensive investigations, multiple witnesses, medical experts, cross-examinations, detailed forensic evidence. Sometimes they take years before a verdict is reached. But Angela's case seemed to move at an unusually rapid pace. Reports later indicate that over the following months, discussions had taken place between the prosecution and the defense, not in open court, not before the public, but through a plea bargaining process. Now, let's pause here, because plea bargains are legal. They're used in many justice systems around the world, including Kenya. The idea is that in certain circumstances, an accused person may plead guilty to a lesser offense or reach an agreement with the prosecution, avoiding a full trial. Supporters argue that plea bargains reduce case backlogs, save court resources, and spare families the emotional toll of prolonged proceedings. Critics, however, worry that in serious offenses, especially those involving loss of life, they can leave victims' families feeling excluded and unheard. And that's exactly what happened here. According to Angela's family, they weren't informed that such a significant agreement had been reached. They believed they were attending what was listed as a routine court mention. Instead, they learned that the case had already taken a dramatically different direction. Imagine that. You prepare yourself to hear updates about a murder trial. You expect another court date, perhaps the scheduling of witnesses. Instead, you discover decisions that fundamentally change the case have already been made. That sense of shock quickly turned into anger.
This is justice denied. Muthoni was just 24 years old. I have evidence. I have records. Witnesses. They were never called. Hakuna mtu ameitwa.
One of the most controversial developments was that the original murder proceedings did not continue in the way many expected. Through the plea agreement, the case proceeded on the basis of a reduced charge, ultimately resulting in a conviction for manslaughter rather than a full murder conviction. That distinction matters. Legally, murder and manslaughter are different offenses. Murder generally requires proof of malice aforethought, the legal intention to kill or cause grievous harm. Manslaughter applies where a death has occurred unlawfully, but the legal elements required for murder are not established, or where a plea agreement changes the basis of the conviction. Both are serious offenses, yes, but the sentencing possibilities can be very different. Now ask yourself, when you hear about a young woman who suffered blunt force trauma, manual strangulation, and visible facial injuries, what sentence would you expect if someone admitted responsibility? Many Kenyans had their own answers. Then came November 2025. Inside the Kalou law courts, the judge delivered the sentence. 5 years in prison. I know, 5 years. 5 years. For many listening today, those 3 words are probably enough to stop you in your tracks, because regardless of where you stand on sentencing policy, many people felt the punishment simply did not reflect the gravity of Angela's death. The courtroom reportedly erupted with emotion. Angela's mother, Beatrice, struggled to understand how the death of her daughter had resulted in such a sentence. Her family openly rejected the outcome, describing it as profoundly unjust. They argued that they had been denied meaningful participation in a process that directly affected their daughter's case. One detail especially fueled public concern. According to reports surrounding the case, no witnesses testified during a full public murder trial because the plea agreement meant that many of the evidentiary stages people expected simply never took place. Think about what that means emotionally for a grieving family. No opportunity to hear investigators explain the evidence, no detailed testimony from medical experts, no public reconstruction of Angela's final hours. Instead, the case reached its conclusion far sooner than many anticipated. Whether legally proper or not, the outcome left many feeling that important questions had never been publicly answered. News of the 5-year sentence spread quickly. Social media filled with disbelief. Comment sections exploded. People questioned whether Kenya's justice system was doing enough to protect women. Angela's case became a symbol of a much larger conversation about gender-based violence, accountability, and whether existing legal processes adequately reflected the seriousness of femicide. Many activists pointed out that Angela was no longer just one victim. She had become another name in a growing list of women whose deaths were forcing the country to confront uncomfortable realities. And here's something worth reflecting on. Sometimes the outcome of a criminal case doesn't just affect one family. It affects public confidence. When people believe justice has been served, even painful verdicts can bring a measure of closure. But when they don't, the wounds often stay open.
We have not seen justice, and we are appealing for the government of Kenya what to fanyie justice. It is very hurting. Hata we are not able to talk. We have been crying, and I don't know how we are going to do it.
Angela's mother wasn't only mourning her daughter, she was mourning the justice she believed Angela deserved. Refusing to accept the outcome, Angela's family announced that they intend to challenge the sentence. They publicly maintained that 5 years was wholly inadequate and vowed to pursue further legal avenues in search of what they considered true justice. Whether those efforts ultimately changed the legal outcome remains a matter for the courts. But one thing is certain, Angela's story didn't end with the sentencing. In many ways, that's where a new chapter began. Because beyond the courtroom lies an even bigger question. Why do stories like Angela's keep happening? And what can all of us do to ensure fewer families ever have to endure this kind of loss? We'll explore those questions and close Angela's story in the final chapter. There's some true crime cases that end when the judge leaves the courtroom. This isn't one of them. Because even after the sentencing, even after the headlines faded, Angela Muthoni's family was still left asking one painful question. How much is a life worth? Not in money, not in legal terminology, but in justice. Because for them, 5 years could never equal 24 years of dreams that will never be lived. Imagine burying your daughter, then months later believing that her killer would finally stand trial, only to discover that the legal process had already changed direction without your knowledge. That was the reality of Angela's mother, Beatrice Njoki, says her family experienced. Following the sentencing, they publicly rejected the outcome, describing it as deeply unfair and announcing their intention to pursue an appeal. Their message was simple: Angela deserved better. For many families of homicide victims, justice isn't about revenge. It's about acknowledgement. It's about knowing that the legal system recognized the seriousness of what happened. It's about believing someone mattered. Angela mattered. But something unexpected happened. Angela's story refused to disappear. Across social media, radio, television, and community discussions, people continued talking about her case, not because they enjoyed tragedy, no, but because they saw a pattern. Another young woman, another intimate partner, another family planning a funeral instead of a future. Angela's name became part of Kenya's growing conversation about gender-based violence and femicide. Now here's something important. The vast majority of intimate relationships never become violent, and the vast majority of men are not perpetrators of femicide, but when these crimes do occur, they often follow warning signs that friends, family members, employers, neighbors, or even victims themselves may not immediately recognize. That's why conversations like this matter, not to create fear, but to create awareness. One of the most heartbreaking things about domestic violence is that it rarely begins with murder. It often starts much smaller: extreme jealousy, isolation from family and friends, monitoring someone's phone, controlling finances, threats disguised as jokes, explosive anger followed by apologies, promises that it will never happen again, until it does, again and again, and sometimes that violence escalates. We don't know what happened inside Angela's relationship before that final night. It will be unfair to speculate, but her story reminds us why every report of domestic violence deserves to be taken seriously. There's another question many listeners may still be asking. What happened to the 4 men who helped transport Angela to the hospital? Public reporting focused primarily on the case against Alex Nungo and the eventual sentence he received. The available public information does not clearly document the final legal outcomes for the 4 other individuals who were initially arrested, and that uncertainty is important to acknowledge. In true crime, it's tempting to fill gaps with assumptions, but at Crime Dopers, we don't do that. If something isn't publicly established, we say so. Facts matter, especially when someone's reputation or legal responsibility is involved. Even today, there are questions that continue to linger. Could Angela's life have been saved if emergency services had been called immediately? What exactly happened during those missing hours before she was taken to hospital? Why did the family feel excluded from such a significant stage of the legal process? And perhaps the biggest question of all, will Angela's case lead to changes that protect someone else? Those answers may take years, some may never come, but asking the questions is still important. One thing I've noticed after covering so many true crime cases, victims leave behind more than crime scenes. They leave lessons. Angela's story teaches us that silence can be dangerous, that domestic violence isn't a private matter when someone's life is at risk, that communities have a role to play, that justice must not only be done, it must also be seen to be done. Because public confidence in the justice system depends on transparency, fairness, and accountability. And when families feel unheard, society should pay attention. As I was researching Angela's story, one detail stayed with me. She was only 24 years old. 24. That's younger than many people listening to this episode. She should have had decades ahead of her. Birthdays, career milestones, family celebrations, dreams she hadn't even dreamt yet. Instead, her mother now carries memories instead of conversations, photographs instead of hugs, and questions instead of answers. That is a true cost of femicide. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please remember this. You don't have to wait until violence becomes deadly before seeking help. Tell someone you trust. Reach out to family. Speak to local authorities or organizations that support survivors of gender-based violence. Sometimes one conversation, one phone call, or one person believing you can change everything. And if Angela's family proceeds with further legal action, we'll continue following the case and provide updates as verified information becomes available. Thank you for spending this time with me. If Angela's story moved you, don't let it end here. Share this episode, not to spread fear, but to spread awareness. You never know who might recognize warning signs in their own relationship because of a conversation like this. If you're new to Crime Dopers, welcome to the family. Be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And if you believe in telling victim stories with compassion, accuracy, and respect, leaving a rating or review helps more people discover this podcast. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, trust your instincts, and remember, behind every case file is a human life that mattered. I'm Ol Joro, and this has been Crime Dopers, where crime meets truth. Stay safe, stay alert, and I'll see you in the next one.
Crime dopers. We don't look away.